Hey everybody, this video is about LEDs and also SLDs. SLDs stands for superluminescent diodes. So you may see a couple devices that are actually pretty expensive out there that use SLDs. So they're basically like LEDs on steroids. They're much more intense, okay? And the video is about what's the difference between that and laser light, okay? And this is actually, I've talked about this in other videos, just as little tangents, but it deserves its own video. And I'd be happy to take any questions, by the way, about any devices you come across that use LEDs and what their claims are, what they're claiming. But the main thing that you have to note here, okay, is that there's 3,500 studies, if not maybe a little bit more at this point, on lasers, okay? And the laser is a specific type of semiconducting gas diode, okay? You usually see the gas elements in the specifications. That's how you know that it's a laser. And that makes a coherent beam of photons, okay? What's an LED? An LED works very, very differently. There's no gas in there at all. And it's a way to exchange ions and release photons, but the beam is completely incoherent. Okay, so an LED is like makes a great flashlight, makes really good headlamps on cars. You'll see them on cars all the time now. Okay, and they're pretty bright, but brightness or lumens does not always mean does not always have efficacy. And so all those studies that have been cited, if you're considering an LED device or SLD device, just keep in mind that when you read about all those amazing, and there's a lot of amazing studies out there on laser therapy, it doesn't apply. It does not apply directly to the device you're considering. Okay, now think about that for a second. Now if those 3,500 studies were studies that were done with LEDs, showing that kind of efficacy, well then, yeah, I mean, it would be a completely different situation. That's not the situation. So what's the main drawback with an LED and SLD? LEDs and SLDs definitely have efficacy. They do have some sort of effects on some types of conditions, but in general it's very minimal. And the reason is very simple, very, very simple to understand. It's because LEDs, again, put out that incoherent beam. So one of the main challenges with even laser therapy is that when a laser goes into the tissue, I'll use a little visual example for you. When it hits the tissue, okay, it immediately starts to scatter. A good percentage of it, actually, just starts to scatter, okay? And then as it passes through the tissue beneath, depends on the area that you're treating, for example, a lot of fat, scatters a ton of tissue. What if you have to get that to the muscle beneath or a joint beneath? Or what if you're just treating a knuckle, where the knuckle is right there on the surface? I mean, you could shine a flashlight. I mean, try it. You could shine a flashlight, and it makes your whole knuckle light up. You know, an LED flashlight. That's very different. So some tissue, and will definitely scatter. The skin scatters a lot. So it's always about how much joules, how much energy can we get into the tissue in that area that will basically lead to good efficacy. And so with LEDs, you're already at a tremendous disadvantage, including the SLDs, okay? If some companies try to claim SLDs are more magical than LEDs, which they probably will try to do, is that it's already incoherent. So think about that. So you already have an issue coming out of the laser, so it's already scattering. And then some of it hits the tissue and scatters more. So if you're using an LED or an SLD, if you even want to try to get good efficacy for a lot of different more acute or chronic conditions or things like that, you really have to like dig it into the tissue, which, by the way, several companies that market those devices don't actually guide you on and don't recommend as a protocol. They actually just tell you to move it over the surface. Very close, but this is silly. I mean, if anything, they should be telling you jam that thing into your body as much as you can to try to move as much blood out of the way as possible, to try to remove any sort of scattering elements if you can. But so that's the main difference, okay? And that's something to keep in mind. An LED device, an SLD device is a light therapy device. The other thing to note is that these LEDs or SLDs generally are very cheap devices to manufacture. So I'm just throwing that out there just to consider for a second that LEDs, for example, are so cheap, they're practically free. I mean, they're practically free. We're talking like several cents, okay? SLDs are a little bit more, but we're still talking about cents here. And that's what that component, that's a big difference than a semiconducting gas diode with that's a good device. Big difference in price there. Okay, so a lot of these LEDs and SLD companies are trying to justify usually exorbitant prices for devices, and the components behind the LED also usually are very cheap because not a lot of power can really run through these LEDs, SLDs. That's why you'll always note that on those devices, you'll usually see that they're pulsing. They have pulsing function or super pulsing function. And again, that's because the components in there, as well as the emitters themselves, really can't handle a lot of heat. Otherwise, there's an issue. So that kind of wraps that up for now. If you have any more detailed questions about kind of what I shared about different devices you're considering and what kind of emitters they have on it, or sometimes it's not always easy to come across in the specifications if they're withholding information about what the light source is, just ask me and I would definitely have that research for you already done. Thanks.